Stefon Diggs is beating out Brandon Aiyuk in Washington right now, and in a minute, I'll tell you why signing Aiyuk today could be the most expensive mistake of this offseason, because according to Nikki Jabvala of The Athletic, the Commanders were ready to sign him until something flipped the whole plan, and I'm telling you exactly what that was. While Adam Peters figures out that receiver room, DC just dropped the master plan the entire DMV has been waiting on, a $3.7 billion stadium at RFK, with a real opening date, but there's fine print that could slow the whole thing down, and I'm getting into that right now. And to close it out, ESPN just named the best defensive move of the entire Commanders offseason. And it's not who you think, and it has everything to do with whether Jaden Daniels finally gets a defense that can back him up in year 3. Stay locked in, because Ashburn is not playing around this offseason. Raise hail. Okay, bro, I need y'all to stop everything for a second because this matters. We've spent months speculating whether Brandon Aiyuk ends up in Washington. It's the story that won't go away, the one every Hogs Haven Daily Slop touches on in some way, the one every athletic mailbag mentions even in passing, and this week we finally got something concrete. Nikki Jabvala dropped a direct report, no hedging. She confirmed that earlier in the offseason, the Commanders had real interest in Aiyuk, to the point where they'd consider a 1-year, highly incentivized deal the moment San Francisco released him. I want to get this close to her exact words because the wording matters. She said Jaden Daniels obviously has a close relationship with the 28-year-old receiver. They were teammates at Arizona State, and that Adam Peters was part of San Francisco's front office when they drafted Aiyuk back in 2020. So Peters knows exactly what Aiyuk can be at his peak. None of that part is new, fam. We've been saying that for months. The Daniels-Aiyuk Arizona State connection, Peters' history with him in San Francisco, all of that builds a nice reunion narrative. But here's the twist, and this part is new. That interest existed before Aiyuk started his social media crusade against the Niners. And when I say crusade, I'm not exaggerating. Aiyuk's been posting videos calling the organization stupid, directly insulting head coach Kyle Shanahan, general manager John Lynch, and his now former agent Ryan Williams, who he fired in November, saying nobody speaks for him anymore. There was a video where he literally put money in a backpack as a symbolic gesture toward the organization. And the strongest one of all, he basically said his relationship with the Niners will never be repaired, that he'll never step foot in that building again, with one exception, October 19th, when San Francisco hosts the Commanders on Monday Night Football. Sit with that for a second. That's a player publicly saying the only day he'd set foot in his own team's facility is when they're playing the team everybody assumes is going to sign him. That's not subtle, fam. That's basically an audition. Now here's what I actually need to break down for you with a clear head. What does this mean for Washington? According to Jabvala's report, things shifted. She says it herself. If the Niners release Aiyuk before training camp, the Commanders would still consider him, but they'd have to feel incredibly confident he's fit physically and emotionally, not just to sign, but to commit to what they're building. That phrase, physically and emotionally, is the whole story right there. That's not casual reporter language. That's language reflecting exactly what the front office is signaling to the press indirectly. We have reservations. And look, I'm not the type to wave this off just because we want to see Aiyuk in burgundy and gold. Let's be honest. This is a receiver who hasn't played a competitive snap since week 7 of 2024, when he tore his ACL and MCL against Kansas City. Almost 2 years without real football. And on top of that, the Niners voided the guarantees in his contract for not following the team's rehab timeline. That's not a small detail, fam. That's an organization formally documenting that the player didn't cooperate with his own recovery process. And here's my opinion. No filter. I get the fantasy of Aiyuk with Daniels. I get it. I share part of it. But as the producer of this channel, as somebody analyzing this with my head and not just my fan heart, I have to tell you the red flags are right there, blinking. A player publicly insulting his current organization, who hasn't talked to media in over a year, who'd rather send cryptic messages on social media instead of handling this like a professional. That's exactly the kind of behavior a disciplined front office like Adam Peters has to evaluate carefully before investing. even on a cheap one-year deal. And that brings me straight to a piece that dropped today from A to Z Sports, which I think is the best counter-argument I've read in this entire debate. The framing is simple, but it hits hard. Everybody's obsessed with the Aiyuk storyline, and that makes sense given the time of year, but he's not actually the best option available for Washington. The better option, according to that piece, is STEFON Diggs. And when you look at the numbers, it's hard to disagree. Diggs played around 55% of New England's offensive snaps in 2025 and still put up 85 receptions, 1,013 yards, and 4 touchdowns in the regular season. His catch rate was 83.3%, the career best, and across 17 starts. But the number that genuinely blew my mind is this. Per Pro Football Focus, Diggs averaged 2.42 yards per route run, which ranked 5th among the 30 eligible receivers with at least 98 regular season targets. 5th, ahead of names like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, George Pickens, Justin Jefferson, and A.J. Brown. Read that again, fam. Diggs, at his age, producing better route running efficiency than Justin Jefferson. That's not decline. That's a top-tier receiver still playing like a top-tier receiver. My personal take, and I know this is going to spark debate in the comments. If I were Adam Peters, choosing between the emotional and physical risk of Aiyuk versus the proven recent production of Diggs, I sign Diggs without thinking twice. It's not that Aiyuk doesn't have a ceiling. Of course he does. When healthy, he's an elite-level receiver too. But high-level football in a real contention window with Jaden Daniels in year 3 isn't the time to gamble on emotional projects. It's time to add reliable production. That said, and here's my honest uncertainty, I could be wrong. The Daniels-Aiyuk connection is a factor no statistical model fully captures. Quarterback-receiver chemistry, when it already exists from college, speeds up the learning curve in ways cold numbers don't reflect. So I'm not ruling out that we end up seeing both of them on the roster eventually. Diggs now as the safe bet, and Aiyuk later in the summer if San Francisco finally releases him, and if he shows, through actions and not videos, that he's ready to commit. That's what I'm hoping plays out. Keep it a buck. Adam Peters' patience on this whole situation has been surgical, and I don't think that changes now. Bro, I needed that emotional breather before getting into this one because this story actually matters long-term for this franchise. This Tuesday, June 30th, Mayor Muriel Bowser and the DC Office of Planning released the full master plan to transform the 180 acres of the old RFK Stadium campus. And when I say full, I mean an 89-page document with specific numbers, not vague campaign promises. Let's break it down, because every figure here tells part of the story. The new stadium is going to have 65,000 seats. The Commanders are committing to invest at least $2.7 billion just in stadium construction. And listen to this, fam. That represents the largest private investment in the history of Washington, D.C. Not the largest sports investment, the largest private investment, period, in the city's history. The total project, counting the mixed-use development around the stadium, comes out to $3.7 billion. That includes 6 different districts inside the campus: housing, retail, entertainment, recreation, a new sportsplex, and ecological zones along the Anacostia River. Let's talk housing, because this is what turns this project into something bigger than just a stadium. We're talking between 5,500 and 6,600 new housing units, with at least 30% set aside as affordable. That was a specific commitment negotiated between the city and the team, not an optional suggestion. DC taxpayers are putting up $1 billion to prep the site and build 2 parking structures. That part is public money, gotta be honest about that. But in exchange, the project promises to generate around 30,000 construction jobs, 2,000 permanent jobs, and approximately $5.1 billion in tax revenue for the district long term. Those numbers, even at 70% of projection, transform that part of Capitol Hill completely. And there's a piece of this plan that genuinely excites me as a fan, beyond the football: ecological restoration of the Anacostia River with new public access to Kingman and Heritage Islands. The director of the Office of Planning, Anita Kozart, talked about a significant amount of park space distributed throughout the area, prioritizing pedestrian and bike connectivity with the Hill East and Kingman Park neighborhoods. So this isn't just build a stadium and surround it with parking lots. This is a real attempt to reconnect that part of the city with a river it's historically been cut off from. Now, here's what you need to know about the process. Because it's not 100% locked in yet. A 45-day public comment period opened and closes August 14th, 2026. If you want to weigh in as a resident, you can do it through the ourrfk.dc.gov portal, by email, or in person at the public hearing on August 1st at St. Coletta of Greater Washington from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. There will also be info sessions on July 11th, 15th, and 18th at markets and libraries around the area. This plan was developed with input from more than 1,700 participants across 33 public events. That's a level of civic engagement you rarely see on a project this size, and it deserves recognition. The Office of Planning expects to send the final version to the DC Council in the fall, with the goal of getting it adopted before the year ends. That would allow the necessary zoning changes to begin. Infrastructure construction on the site already started back in April. The official stadium opening is projected for 2030, and here's the part that genuinely has me hyped, bro. That campus is being considered as a potential host site for Super Bowl LXV and the 2031 Women's World Cup Final. Picture that. A Super Bowl in Washington, D.C. in a brand new stadium built with the largest private investment in this city's history. My personal take here, after years fam, of uncertainty about where this franchise was even going to end up playing, of Virginia rumors, of Maryland rumors, of that entire political soap opera, we finally have a plan with numbers, dates, and a real public engagement timeline. That doesn't guarantee everything goes perfectly. Projects this size always hit delays, always have surprises along the way, but the simple fact that we're talking about an 89-page document with specific figures instead of vague press releases tells me this is real. Washington is getting its stadium, in its city, on its river, with its history, and for any fan who spent years listening to excuses about why this couldn't happen, that's a win worth celebrating without cynicism. And to close things out, let's talk about something that needed real technical discussion, because the public narrative around this defense is still stuck in the trauma of 2025. Quick context reminder, the Commanders fired defensive coordinator Joe Witt Jr. immediately after going 5-12 in a season they started as Super Bowl contenders. The defense finished ranked 30th in EPA per play. 30th fam, that's basically the basement of the league. If Washington has another rough season in 2026, there's a real chance head coach Dan Quinn, who built his reputation specifically as a defensive coordinator, ends up out too. That's the real pressure sitting behind everything happening on that side of the ball right now. That's why this story matters so much. ESPN's Seth Walder, in his 2026 offseason grades report, specifically called out the signing of safety Nick Cross as the move he liked most out of Washington's entire offseason. Not Owa. Not the Sonny Styles draft pick. Cross. And when you see the full context, it makes sense. The Commanders stole Cross away from the Indianapolis Colts on a 2-year, $13 million contract after he started all 17 games in each of the last 2 seasons. Walder put it in perfect context. He said Washington brought in middle-class free agent defenders, Cross, cornerback Amik Robertson, linebacker Leo Chanel, and also selected linebacker Sonny Styles with the number 7 pick in the draft. The signal is clear. This wasn't one flashy move. This was a systematic piece-by-piece rebuild of a unit that was broken. Let's talk Cross specifically, because his story is the kind I love breaking down with real technical detail. He came out of Maryland as a standout prospect on fairly average teams, and he launched himself into a 3rd-round pick, 96 overall, in the 2022 draft by running the 40-yard dash in 4.34 seconds at the Combine. One draft analyst described him as the bouncer of Maryland's defense, a chase player seeking to make a statement on impact with stopping power near the line or as an open field tackler, though limited as a tight-hipped mover in more open coverage. What I love most about his profile is the durability. Across his first 4 seasons, he played in 67 of 68 regular season games. That's a level of physical consistency any defensive coordinator values highly. And since becoming a full-time starter in Indianapolis, his numbers held up. Over 130 combined tackles across his last 2 seasons, 4 interceptions, 10 pass deflections, 11 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. ESPN's John Keim laid out exactly why this signing solves a specific problem. Washington's secondary was way too inconsistent last year and missed too many tackles. They needed to upgrade their starting safeties. Will Harris missed 8 games with a broken leg in 2024, and Quan Martin got benched late in the season. Cross arrives fast, 4.34 in the 40, and Young at 24 with a reputation as an aggressive blitzer and a sound run defender. And that last part matters, fam, because this defense finished 30th against the run last year. Cross attacks that exact problem head on, but I want to take you past Cross because there's another name getting completely overlooked in the public conversation, and that's an analytical error I need to correct. K'Lavon Chaisson. According to a recent Hogs Haven breakdown, Chaisson has a real shot at being the most underrated defensive addition of the entire 2026 offseason. And the most interesting part is that he turned down a chance at a longer, more secure deal to sign with Washington because he believed this was a team capable of making a real playoff run. That tells you something about the guy's character. Chaisson is coming off a career season with New England in 2025. He played at least 66% of the Patriots' defensive snaps from weeks 9 through 16, racking up 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 1 pass deflection, and 2 forced fumbles during that stretch. But the number that genuinely floors me is his average time to pressure. 2.87 seconds. That's a real quick twitch edge rusher, somebody who wins with initial burst and doesn't need extra time to generate pressure. And here's the tactical piece that's really interesting. Chaisson has a real opportunity to capitalize if Odafe Oweh, the near $100 million addition on the other side, starts drawing extra attention from blockers. Because when an offense has to dedicate extra resources to Oweh, that opens up one-on-one windows for Chaisson. That's basic pass rush geometry, fam. When a team has to choose who gets help blocking, somebody ends up alone. And if Chaisson keeps producing like he did in that Patriots stretch, he's going to be the one who makes that decision hurt. And we can't leave out Leo Chenal, who signed a 3-year, $24.75 million contract back in March. Chenal comes from Super Bowl championship teams in Kansas City in 2022 and 2023, but he never quite locked into a full-time role there. He topped 50% of defensive snaps only once across 4 seasons, despite appearing in 65 of 68 regular season games. He missed the final 3 games last year with a shoulder injury. What brought him to Washington, in his own words, was the chance for more playing time and the chance to join new defensive coordinator Durante Jones's linebacker-friendly scheme, which he got familiar with during Jones's time with the Minnesota Vikings. His effectiveness as a blitzer isn't in question, 3 sacks in 2025, but pass coverage isn't his obvious strength. NFL.com's draft profile flagged concerns about agility and lateral movement given his tightly built frame. Honestly, fam, that's the real question for Chenal in 2026. Can Jones's scheme hide that limitation enough for his blitzing and run defense to carry the weight? My bottom line on this whole defensive rebuild, being direct about it, Adam Peters didn't chase a star name in defensive free agency. He bet on depth, on players with something to prove, and on fitting specific pieces into Durante Jones's scheme. When Washington opens the season September 13th on the road against Philadelphia, there's a real chance we see 6 or 7 new starters on defense. Cross, Styles as a rookie, Oweh and Chaisson on the edge, Chenal at linebacker, Robertson at cornerback. That's basically a full rebuild in a single offseason. It's going to be risky. There are going to be painful growing pains early in the season while these new pieces learn to play together. But if you're asking me whether I trust this version of the defense more than the one we watched collapse last year, the answer is yes, without hesitation. And that's everything I've got for you today, fam. Look, today was one of those days where I genuinely felt like I was covering 3 different stories that together tell you exactly where this franchise is headed. We've got the Aiyuk drama, reminding us that talent without discipline is a risk any serious front office has to weigh carefully. We've got the RFK Stadium plan, finally giving us something concrete after years of uncertainty. A real physical future for this franchise in this city. And we've got a defense being rebuilt with patience and intelligence, not panic, after a collapse that hurt everybody who watched every single game last year. Washington has almost 100 years of history. It's got legends. It's got moments burned permanently into this city's memory. None of that changes because of a Jabvala report or an urban planning document, but it does tell me 2026 is shaping up to be a season where the roster, the stadium, and the identity all start lining up at the same time. Raise hail, always. If this video gave you something, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Do you trust Diggs or Aiyuk more for 2026? I want to read every single answer. See y'all in the next one.